I would need a longer table, I guess, which I could have done if I switched tables, but
Someday.
someday maybe I'll try it on my next podcast.
Who is,
Okay. I can hear you.
oh yeah, who's your next guest gonna be?
It's a top secret.
Oh, okay, okay, fine.
No,
Fine.
I'm kidding. It's only because I can't manage to remember the name.
That's fair. I think I have
No.
Parker Posey next.
Oh, okay. Yeah, mine is not actually very controversial, which is good.
Oh, is it?
I don't know. I'm trying not to be that controversial. Like I need a little bit of balance because I want to be able to bring on people who are not all necessarily going to be like insanely controversial. And
Yeah.
then I'm gonna do I might have one on, though I might get one on because somebody reached out to me yesterday who is extremely controversial, but I couldn't say no. I'll tell you if it happens.
Richard
Um,
Spencer?
I know, no, but yeah, I'll tell you if it happens.
Okay.
I mean, I'm surprised they asked me. They must think I'm an ally, but I actually have all sorts of judgy thoughts on this person. So they'll be in for a little bit of a surprise.
Alec Baldwin?
You know, I think regardless of whether I do have judgments on the person or not, it's still, I'm always going to be fair. So I don't think it matters. I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's still a fair choice to pick me to do it because I'm always going to be fair, but it doesn't mean I'm going to be endorsing, And I think there's some people who like, they call themselves journalists and they criticize the mainstream media, and I'm just thinking, man, so much hypocrisy here because
Hmm.
they're like friends with all these politicians and they're hanging out with them and they're promoting them. They go heavily trying to destroy anybody who challenges their narratives. And it's like, that is not journalism. And it's just like, how are you criticizing these mainstream journalists who are maybe not doing a fantastic job? I have a lot of criticism myself, but compared to what you're doing, I don't even think that remotely compares.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. I think, I mean, I think there's this emergence of like, you know, people love to hate on mainstream journalists and mainstream journalism, and there's a lot of good reasons for it. I mean, I deliver a lot of criticism myself, but it's like as if sort of not community journalism, but as if this independent journalism, or as if this like, citizen journalism is this like, beacon of everything that's good and wonderful. And you look at it, and for the most part, it is incredibly biased.
Hmm.
Even, the funding sources are often dubious. Sometimes they come from the readers, which, is good. But at the same time, you don't know if one reader is donating, you know, 5,000, 10,000, $1 million. But also, even if you're collecting small donations, the readers are expecting not necessarily objectivity. They're often subscribing because they believe in the ideology and the type of reporting that that particular publication has.
Yeah.
So that's something that I feel like a lot of people miss because they're so gung ho to go against the, MSM narrative. So I feel like a lot of these things are not like really the answer.
I mean, what other options are there?
Well,
We can turn off the
um,
internet if you want.
no, I don't think so. But I would like to see journalism become just return to a more objective, or maybe it was never that objective. I don't think you can achieve maybe perfect objectivity. I don't think that's necessarily possible. But I guess if I was starting a journalistic organization, that is an idea that I've dabbled with. Um, I'd hire people from various spectrums of ideologies, so you wouldn't be beholden to one particular ideology. And that would kind of keep some checks and balances because people can sort of debate different stories, present different perspectives in the editorial meetings, kind of hold each other to account. They would strive for truth as the objective and really report on the facts and ask. There's certain questions that you can ask when it comes to story coverage that can kind of guide you. And the editors that I used to work with earlier on in my career, they were really good about pushing back. Like I couldn't just get away with just saying something that was not at all backed by anything.
What year did you start in the industry?
I mean, it
Or the
was,
fifth estate? Is it the fourth estate? The fifth estate. The
yeah.
fourth, right?
I mean, is it fifth? I thought it was fifth, but I could
Yep.
be.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I started very young. So, I mean, I was getting paid for my writing when it's in the 90s, but
Okay.
but I was a teenager. And in the 2000s, I had an online publication. So it's kind of funny because I started out as an online, kind of worked my way in reverse. I started in a more non-traditional way. So I started my own thing, even though I had some writing that I had published in print that I got paid for, very little, like $50, but like I said, I was a teenager. That was a fortune for me. Uh, like a couple of hours or an hour to do an article, and I'm being paid $50. It's like a gold mine. But then I started my own website, and I was editing for. It was like the heyday of the internet. So I learned kind of doing it.
But we have to be kind of specific with timing because the internet's changed a lot in the last 20 years.
Right.
So, like, internet 1.0, so the heyday of the internet, like, are we talking AOL or that would be the 90s, right? So these are like Usenet
Yeah.
forums. So, like, what was your entry point? What was your aesthetic when you set up this website?
Yeah, good question. So, this was in the late 90s, early 2000s. So, and I was dabbling more on the entertainment side of things. So, I mean, there were other websites, but it was a time where there just weren't as many. They existed, but it weren't as many. So I think it was easier to go. Um, it was much easier to kind of get a lot of traffic if you
Yeah.
connect it. It was more of a community feel, especially in that domain, because if you would kind of connect with other people who were in that space.
So
Um,
I can imagine that there would be a lot of fan sites for various different personalities or various different geeky parts of the industry, the entertainment industry. What was your MO or your spread, like your vision of what you wanted to produce, and then how did that connect you with a community?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was just like interested in interviewing people. So that was really what it was. It gave me an excuse to connect with people because it was easier to approach someone and say, "Hey, I want to interview you for my web publication," as opposed to being a random person and saying, "Hey, I just want to talk to you." So that was really what drew me in. But somebody gifted me the website and the domain name and a little bit of hosting. So, and it was originally a website for modeling. And
Oh,
I had zero interest in that, but I sort of transformed it. But I had cover models for a while on the website.
And so,
but it was like you said, it was all about fandom. Fandom was a really big part of it, and a lot of the people who were starting websites at the time really were fans, and they were really excluded. Like they were not seen as mainstream media at all, the way they are now. Now, a lot of these same websites are like professional organizations with staff and money, like the ones that survived. But at the time, like I remember going to some press junkets where for movies, right? They just started inviting some of those websites because they just gotten influential. And the publicists, they treated them like little kids because in a sense the way they behaved was not the most professional, and they were not seen as professionals at that time. They really were movie fans and lovers and geeks, and that has completely changed.
and your medium was written word. This is before necessarily the podcast came out. Maybe the podcast was just starting to get going, but certainly
I don't
not. You
remember
didn't
the
have hosting
podcast
for
being-
video, right?
No,
Okay.
I don't
Did you
think YouTube
record
was
them?
around.
Did you record these, or just for your own, to make notes and to dress it up into print? Like, what was your method
yeah.
for doing this when you started out?
I just recorded them for my own. I always recorded the interviews. I'm not somebody who like takes notes because I always like to listen. So I always recorded them. I had all these different tape recorders throughout the years, but it was always written medium. I would transcribe them. My most hated thing.
Really? And was
I
this
hate transcribing.
this over the phone interviews, or would you travel to the different people or meet up with them in person?
In the beginning, it was over the phone. I interviewed one of my first interviews was actually Groucho Marx's son, Arthur, and he made me cry.
Why?
He was like Groucho. Like he was like a mini Groucho. And I was I was young and very vulnerable. And he was very Groucho like. But it was a great interview actually. But he did hit me in a few places.
Just by telling you stories or by interacting with you?
Interacting with me. I mean, he was rough. I don't know if he made me cry. I mean, I'm probably exaggerating a little bit, but I remember right after I was supposed to interview someone who was doing a play about Groucho, and he could tell that my voice was a little bit off. He's like, okay, what did he say to you? Because he knew that he was quite rough, especially with women. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So how many for this first website, is it still around?
No, I had to shut it down very long time ago at this point because it was just too much, and I didn't know how to build up. I regret it. I should have kept it. I mean, I had about 600,000 visitors a month. So,
wow.
I think building something like that now would be really hard.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, it's possible if you'd have to do podcasts and YouTube and stuff like that, but it's definitely possible to do that, but not in the form. The form is very specific to that time, and you were at a certain place in time. So what happened to all that data? Do you still have it all? And will it be posted? Resurrected? All those
I have not.
audio interviews. It's got to be.
I mean, it wasn't just interviews. I mean, it was interviews. It was also movie reviews. I had people writing for me, so a lot of people did reviews. I did reviews. So there was different kinds of articles on there. So it was an all around entertainment website at the time.
Okay.
There was even book reviews. Yeah.
What did you
remember those?
Are you book reviews?
Just books.
Audio book reviews on Amazon. I know about those things.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Did you grow up in stardom in the entertainment industry?
Well, I was interested in acting, so I guess in a way, I wouldn't say I grew up in it, but I was always interested in film, so I was writing little scripts, and I studied acting. And also, when I lived in New York, I studied at Carnegie Hall with my beloved acting teacher, Robert X. Modica. He's passed away since, but I would study from like about what, 6 p.m. till 3 o'clock in the morning. And he used to teach with Meisner. So kind of one of the godfathers of acting, American acting.
Okay.
Yeah, he'd tell us amazing stories. He was a Marine, fought in Korea. So I kind of stayed for the stories at first because I didn't understand the method. But
Capital
and
T,
studied here
capital
too.
M method, like the method, or just the generic term? 'Cause I know
Well,
there's this method
no, he didn't do.
thing.
Yeah, so that's Lee Strasberg. That's the method. But Meisner had his own, also kind of a method, but a different one. I also hard to understand because the Lee Strasberg, sorry, method is more like you stare at a snowflake or you imagine it until you feel it melting, sort of, right? Whereas Meisner was much more reliant on one's imagination and is much more about responding to situations in the moment. I really, but there's a set of like exercises that you do. So it almost becomes something transforms in you over time just by doing these exercises. But I remember at first I was like, what's going on here? I just really did not understand what was going on.
Was it like psychodrama or something like that?
What do you mean by that?
Like kind of like these culty gatherings where people try to like get reactions out of each other and plumb the psychoses of one another kind of thing.
Well, no, I mean, it's like a lot of acting classes, weirdly enough, and I've been to some of those. They do feel culty for sure because they're around the cult personality of the teacher. And there is like, oh, you need to talk about your personal life and all of that stuff. And I was just, I'm kind of allergic to that stuff. But no. But there's this one exercise that's kind of at the core of it. Maybe you consider it that, but I don't. But it is darn confusing. So it's called the repetition exercise, and I'll go, oh, your stare, and you go, my stare. I'm like, yes, your stare, and it kind of keeps going, and until something changes, and then I'll observe a new behavior, and I'll say it.
Okay.
But it's really about observation, and to be honest, it sort of changed my life because it made me much more present with the people I'm with and also much more authentic to who I am and expressing myself. Because I think, I really didn't like myself in some ways in my early 20s because I felt like I was true to myself. And I felt like I was I knew I was a vulnerable person, that I wore my heart on my sleeve, but I came across as extremely aloof. And actually, I irritated the heck out of my scene partners when I did these exercises. They would just get so mad at me because I'd just be like, I come across like I'm super cold and I just mock them and trigger them. And I thought I was doing great. But what I realized is like, it's one thing to feel like if I say to you, oh, I love you, I might feel the love inside, right? But the way I just expressed that to you, it means nothing, right? I've given you nothing. But if I say it to you and I connect, like it's so important to give meaning to the words when you say them to another person. So that's something that I've grown much more conscious of, even just in my life. And it also makes it much more difficult to, be manipulative or be
False.
you're just much more
Duplicitous.
false. Yeah, you're always like you always observe things in people, and you always end up. Becomes really automated that you react. I think people often think that actors are fake, right? I think that's something that a lot of people
Well, the word hypocrite
insinuate.
comes from the word actor, so.
That's interesting. Well, I did not know that. Is that true? Are you making it
Yeah,
up?
I can double check it right now,
Okay.
but I know
Well,
it's true.
But the truth is, like, a good actor is actually, I mean, as an actor, you're trying to be as truthful as possible under imaginary circumstances. So your circumstances might be imaginary, but you're finding the truth. So it's like it's as opposite to that as possible.
Yeah, it's serious play.
Sure. Sure. I mean, and I think the best actors are people with the most empathy, imagination, they can, and understanding of human nature. Like you're really acting, you're really writing the scene in between the lines. Like all the work is really done not in the moment, right? You're doing it in the understanding of the play, like, good writing is very important, obviously, what you're working with. Even bad writing, if you have bad writing, but a really, really good actor, the reason they're a good actor is because they're able to write all the stuff in between the lines that's not even on the page. So, but I think it's all about how truthful you are. It's like, and that's, I think people really diminish. I mean, there are so many bad actors too, right? And they are false, right? Because they're not going anywhere truthful and they're not digging deep. And I think what I loved in particular about my class in New York is that my teacher was, he was he was he was very truthful, sometimes to the point of being cruel. But
I saw Whiplash. I know what you're talking about.
he was there was a little bit of that. There was a little bit of that. But it was never out of like actually being like he'd yell at you sometimes, but it would be like it'd be like, how you yell at a kid because they're touching fire because you don't want them to do that, So that's what it felt like. And he was also very kind. He really cared, changed a lot of people's lives. And but he attracted a lot of different kinds of people. Like in the class, we had people who were lawyers and, sort of white collar people. And we also had people who, maybe never finished high school and different political orientations. Like we had everybody there. And he could get the roughest guy from, Jersey to go and watch My Fair Lady and come back and say, oh, that made me cry, And so I think that was like a very magical thing. And he really, and because we were working with really good plays, not film scenes, but plays, it meant that we were dealing with deep things. And then the stories that he'd tell, that those were really brought a lot of humanity, and we found each other's humanity as well. So I think that was like very special.
And what ages were you working under him?
It was in my early 20s, and then, but I kind of went back for like 8 years, maybe. Kind of kept coming back. Yeah.
Really? Like for like seasons? You just like snowbirded?
Yeah, for seasons.
Kinda?
Yeah,
Huh.
basically, because I would go back and forth between New York and where I was living in Canada.
And what was that preparing you for? If you put yourself in that position, then what was the future looking like for you in your early 20s?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I think because I've had so many different career ambitions over time. I mean, I was interested in acting, but I think there's something about it that like I held back. I think I just didn't, if I really am honest with myself, I probably didn't think I was good enough or something because I always thought, oh, I'm just maybe lazy or what, but I just didn't go for it. But I do think that it changed my life in other ways. So it contributed a lot. Like I am ultimately like a shy person, and people probably don't believe me when I say that now, because I've learned how to sort of get through that.
Were you always shy, like a very quiet little girl?
I was incredibly, yes. Maybe not quiet, but shy.
Huh. What do you
So
mean? So you'd
here's
be
the
belting out rock songs, Sammy Hagar style, but then when people ask you a question, you'd clam up.
Okay, so here's the thing. I would do things that scared the heck out of me. So if I wanted to I would raise my hand in class because I wanted to participate. I wanted to say whatever I wanted to say, but I would be shaking. When I did interviews with people, like the anxiety to this day that I feel even getting on a phone call, I still feel it,
Hmm.
but I just do it anyways.
Okay.
So that's what I'm talking about. I still feel a lot of social anxiety. It's just easier because the more you do something, I think you build like a muscle.
Yeah.
And I think I have a tendency now to be better at like, almost taking over a room in some situations, and being like more of a leader and things
Yeah.
like that, which I probably never would have imagined in the past. But it's something that it doesn't happen like it doesn't, well, it does happen organically, but it's not something that I would have imagined. I was very scared, but I'd still do the thing that I was scared of doing, if that makes sense. And I think knowing that I'm shy, I think I see other people who are shy, and I try to like help nudge them a little bit.
So by shy, you mean like socially anxious? Is that what you mean? Like being, and not necessarily
Yeah.
being wrong, but just having to, I guess, be seen in a way? Is that what it is?
Yeah, socially anxious. Like I think acute social anxiety.
Okay. Does that
Yeah.
predispose you towards different perspectives, you think, in social situations, or predispose you towards certain behaviors
I think in
other
terms
than
of
just withdrawing?
yeah, I think in terms of perspectives, I think I have just over the top awareness of everything that goes on around me, which may it's probably what contributes to the anxiety. I just like see every little detail that goes on around
Hmm.
me. And that does make me like that's why like if I do public speaking and which I do find really rough, right? Like I've done keynotes and things like that. I really like to not see the audience. Now I've learned some tricks now, of that things that help me, like maybe focusing on a particular audience member that's maybe a little more engaged with what I'm saying,
Mm.
and by
Hmm.
focusing on them. Because sometimes, and then, also sometimes there is a lot of room for misinterpretation. Like sometimes you look at somebody, because I've taught university classes and things like that, and high school. Oddly enough, I think I mentioned that to you earlier, but sometimes you look at someone and they seem so disinterested, like the most disinterested student. And then the teacher evaluations come in, and you realize that student really loved the class and you thought they hated you the entire time. And it's
Hmm.
like shocking. Or that person comes up to you and they're like, yeah, they loved it. And so what goes on in somebody's head is not always reflected on their face.
Yeah.
So it's a
Maybe they have
dangerous thing to
resting
make
imbecile
assumptions.
face. You don't know till
Yeah.
you
Well,
find out.
there's a somebody I know. Am I allowed to swear?
Yes, we are significantly within the bounds of swearing on the YouTube.
Okay. Okay. So there's a woman that I worked with, and she had that like the resting bitch face. And and it's funny because she has that self-awareness about herself, and she just has that look. She is one of the most wonderful people, but she knows that's what people think, including myself. But one of the most wonderful people. How do you deal with that?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. What's your resting face?
my resting face?
If you were to imagine it, what would you?
Sad.
Oh, wow. Okay. Like grungy kind of sad, or what kind of sadness? Like, Like Coldplay sad, or
I don't
Iron
know.
and Wine sad?
I mean, sometimes it's a resting like bitch one because I know that homeless people don't come up to me. So, but then sometimes somebody said, "Oh, you're the smiley one." I'm like, "What?" I
Oh,
don't
okay.
smile. But I think I smile sometimes when I'm like uncomfortable. So like I don't notice that I do it, so I smile.
Yeah.
And then I never smile in photos.
Why
And
not?
then I think I have like a I hate smiling in photos
Okay. Yeah.
because it's fake. I
Yeah.
can smile in real life. Like I can smile as a reaction to something, or like if you
But
smile
not
at me, I might smile
at the
back. But it
camera.
just
Okay.
to be like, hey, smile in a photo. I hate when people say that. It's not who I am.
Do you
But yeah, but
have,
I
there's
have
just
this sad.
family albums with you just like being dour for your entire
Even my
childhood or so?
baby photos, like my baby photos, I'm never smiling. It's
Okay.
always like a serious face. I just
Oh,
have this
okay.
like
All right.
serious, like intense, deep, like, staring. And my eyes are even like darker and bigger as a child. So like it's
Hmm.
just very, very intense. And
So
like I'm
you're
staring
lightening
deep in
up
your soul.
and kind of
I
withdrawing a
am
little bit.
actually.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the interesting thing is as I get older, I'm aging backwards a little bit. So like
Oh, you
Benjamin
get the Benjamin
Button.
Button thing. Yeah. Me
Yeah, I think
too.
so.
Yeah. A little bit.
Less mature, for sure. By far. I was a pretty mature teen. And now I'm
Serious.
like, yeah, yeah,
What were you
big
serious
time.
about then? Like Dostoevsky or I don't know, like Isbin plays
Dostoevsky.
or something? Dostoevsky.
I mean, yeah,
Euro Eastern
but just
European politics. What?
yeah, I think I was just in general, I think a lot of it was about fitting in, especially because I started working so young. I was like trying to fit into this very adult world, trying to seem older. I was hanging out with middle-aged men,
In the
which sounds
journalism.
wrong in the journalism
It's
world.
fun.
So yeah,
Middle-aged men
yeah.
are people too,
Some of them. No, but the funny thing is, I was like, now I'm like looking back at it, I'm like, I was like really young, like teenage girl, and maybe like a very young female, and like, why were all these like middle-aged men hanging out with me? But back then, I think I thought, well, I was just very smart and serious. But yeah, looking back, I'm like, oh, maybe I misjudged the situation a little bit, but it was fine.
Maybe there were
And I learned
trade-offs.
some things.
They got to check you out,
Eh,
and you got a leg up nepotistic wise.
I didn't get a lot of leg up, but I did get some mentorship, like, get some movie recommendations. And so I got a lot of classic movie recommendations. I think some of them were like molding me in like this, um, like these are
Avuncular
the
or
movies you
groom?
should watch.
Okay, so
I don't think it
they're
was like a
training you. Yeah,
grooming thing. Yeah, they
yeah,
were training me. Like these are
yeah.
the movies you should watch to be a well-adjusted film critic.
Okay. Why did you want to be a film critic? Just out of interest,
You know what? I
spontaneity?
didn't. I loved movies. I
Okay.
actually realized I hated being a film critic because
Oh,
it took away the
it
joy of
ruined it.
watching
Yeah.
movies. Yeah.
Mm.
I stopped. I loved doing interviews though, because that didn't really take away the joy of watching
Yeah.
movies.
No, you get to see
Yeah.
behind the scenes and get to see the
Yeah.
process. Yeah.
I learn and then, but I love doing interviews on all sorts of topics. It was like nice to start moving away from just interviewing people in film. I've lost some of to be honest, I have lost some of my love for um, film or TV. I also feel kind of like I've done it to some extent.
Yeah.
So I've gotten much more interested in like neuroscience and psychology and culture and things like that.
Culture.
Tech, yeah, in recent years.
Okay. What did you learn about the entertainment industry before we get on to your proceeding interests, the interests that come after?
What did I learn about the entertainment industry
Yeah.
in general? In what sense?
Well, during your website, Web 1.0 or, yeah, 2.0? I guess it would be 1.0, right before the big social media
You could call it
bonanza, right?
1.5. Yeah.
1.5, yeah. What did you end up like mapping or seeing about the industry as a whole. And did you focus on certain aspects of it that you did get kind of a insight into?
Interesting question. Is that what people say? That's what people say to buy time to think.
They always say that to me, so I just take it as a compliment and then wait for
Yeah,
whatever is going to come out next.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. Um, I think, what did I learn? I mean, I worked in it pretty extensively. And for me, I guess the evolution of it has been that I'm trying to think about it, to be honest. I'm not
I
sure
can
if I
narrow it
learned
down to
any.
like the
Yeah.
the culture, like the people, like how the relationships work, maybe like
Okay,
the
that's good
depth
because
or
that's
the
where I was.
shallowness, yeah, of or
Yeah,
just the
that's where I was
tenor.
heading with my thoughts. So that's
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah, especially working within it. I found the dynamics to be like there were times there I was because I am kind of an emotional person, even though I don't show it.
Yeah.
Uh, I find the dynamics of it really affected me, especially when I worked on film projects or TV projects myself. And I found certain things were wonderful and certain things I absolutely hated. So when you get sort of to the top tier of things, and which I work, because I work with people, crews that were very much, crews and also sort of the celebrities and the producers and filmmakers. I hated the dynamic that was happening at the top, where people were sort of elevated to these special statuses and there was this kind of phony culture that was going on there. Now there's
Like
exceptions.
like a like a network of courts, like all these different like kings and all these very important people that are always negotiating who deserves more fealty or whatever. Yeah, right.
Yeah, like you
Obsequiousness.
treat certain people in special ways and not in ways that are just like as just a normal human being. And you
Hmm.
have to kind of walk on tiptoes and there's all these political dynamics within that. And because especially my job, like because I worked as a unit publicist. So I had to navigate that very, very carefully. And so that was like really part of my job, but I'm also like someone who's tries to be very authentic and real. And I
Yeah.
stayed true to that, I have. But at the same time, it did make me a little bit sick sometimes to watch these dynamics play out in how people treated someone who might not be on their best behavior or how certain people were protected or how some people were treated as being more special than someone else just
Yeah.
because they were like the star of the show, or something like that.
Yeah.
But I
Was there
also
this might be a question that you might not
mhm,
want to answer because it would be more
maybe
specific, but was
yeah.
there anybody of the top tier, that AAA or whatever, that totally cut through all of that pretense that was just so real that almost like kind of shocked you with how they didn't play that?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, I can't think, but were definitely some people who are like that. Like there are absolutely there are some people like that, and yeah, there are. And there was one showrunner that I absolutely adored. Like he was always like so grounded. He made chocolate for the crew and for everyone. Certain people, it's like whoever is at the very top, he sets or she set the tone, usually he. But but that person sets the tone. We actually had a cinematographer who she wrote letters to everyone at the end when she was leaving, like handwritten notes to a lot of the
Hmm.
members of the crew.
Yeah.
I think those kinds of things are really special. And then, but I also loved what I do always really, really adored working on sets is like the crews. I find the crews are just so it is really like a family environment on set, almost like, because you work so closely with each other in such intense environments that you do become very close, and you joke around, and you need to be able to have like that comfort and trust with each other, right? If you have a very sanitized set where you're tiptoeing around each other, like you're gonna not have a very good time. So you kind of there is kind of a boot camp kind of feel to it. And I think there is something really special about it, that you can joke around and you develop these like fun relationships, but then, one person can really sour it as well. And that could be a problem. Haven't had much of that, but I did have that recently, which was very unpleasant.
So like one person kind of corrupts the whole apple bunch.
Yeah.
Kind of
Well, actually, that's funny, the way you phrased it, because I remember I was on a show with a showrunner that later became my friend, but I remember complimenting him because everyone on that crew was, and the cast, but everyone was just fantastic, right? Like great set, and he made sure the food was great too. Like everything was great. And I said that to him, and he said, "Yeah, well, we did have a couple of people. We had a couple of people, but we got rid of them because you can't let bad apple ruin the bunch." That's exactly what he said, and that is so important. I had a
email break.
Sorry. Hope you can edit around that.
Yeah, no, I got my editing software right here.
Okay.
Did I
It's my headphones for some reason.
Yeah. Testing 1 2 A B.
So you could tell right away that happened.
Your face. I know exactly what people are thinking when I'm staring at them for an hour or so.
Damn it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I was just coming out of my speakers.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
okay. It gets back.
Okay. Yeah. Brodsky.
Can you say something?
Yeah. Oh, A B C D.
Oh, okay, we're good.
C D A B. Were you like doing a midlife retrospective? Do you see yourself in your career? Because it seems like you were just working. You just been working the whole time. Have you been the kind of person that has like a goal or a big ambition, or just like a need to be involved in just following your interests from one thing to the next, and life just kind of has been unfolding in front of you?
That's a really good question. And this time I mean it. No, I just feel like, I was somebody who earlier, especially in my early 20s and before that, I had so much ambition. I was like deeply ambitious, had very specific goals. I also wanted to be a millionaire, was very capitalistic. And then something happened. Like I just completely changed, and I don't know why.
Did you die?
I might have had a little death. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. And
you would know if you did. Trust me.
Would I know? Maybe I'm living. Maybe I'm a ghost, and I just don't know it. Like if like I'm a ghost, but I can't walk through walls. So I'm a very unsuccessful ghost.
Yeah. Do the automatic faucets work for you? Because that'd be annoying. That's what I worry about. That's what I worry about.
Actually, no. I actually do have issues with automatic doors and faucets. So
the doors, even the doors,
makes sense. Very much the doors. So this is all making sense. I think I just had a realization.
You're in the afterlife.
That's so weird. I could be. Maybe I'm half here, half there.
When did you pass through the veil, the Great Veil? Was that like a Saturn Returns thing?
Maybe.
Your 30s, your early, late 20s.
No, it was even earlier than that. So it kind of lost my sense of like direction, and ever since then, I've been just letting things happen.
Okay. Well, but you're
Yeah.
still active. You don't seem at all
I'm
like somebody who cannot be involved from the.
No, so I just do things. I'll be like, oh, I want to do this, and I'll just go and do it. But I just don't have that like overriding ambition anymore of
Okay.
like I want to achieve this very specific thing, which
Okay.
is but that makes it kind of strange. On the one hand, I feel somewhat aimless. On the other hand, I've done a lot of interesting things, but like if you look at my bio, like I don't even put in most things in my bio. It's kind of insane the amount of things I've done.
Hmm.
And but that's what I mean. Like I kind of let things happen. I guess not so passively because I will actually go and I'll do the thing that I want to do. I'll just think of something and I'll be like, okay, I want to do it. Even with journalism, like when I started pursuing like more mainstream journalism, you know, my early publications were all like in really big outlets. And that's because I was like, well, why not? I'm going to just try and do it. So they're going to
Yeah.
say no.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So no, they rejected an idea. Who cares?
Was that a natural transition from publicist to journalist?
Well, no, I started in journalism and then I went into publicity.
Okay. Well, I guess was that a natural transition?
Yeah.
Because basically, you're just propagandizing either the truth or the ego or whatever. Your job is just to
Yeah.
facilitate the communication of a.
Yeah, I mean, I never looked. Okay, so the way I look at it is this: one, so two things that I always made send sure. So one, I never did it anything that would conflict. So always had very specific ethical boundaries, and never would write about anything that I did publicity for. Two, even with publicity, I always looked at it as storytelling. And especially when we were talking about unit publicity, but I did do other kinds of publicity. Unit publicity for film TV is very different, and you're not really promoting the film in the same way. You're really telling the story of how the production happened. So it's really storytelling, and you're capturing interviews and content, photography. But with traditional publicity, which I did do, and I also worked in advertising as a copywriter, I think to me, it was all about storytelling. I would never tell something that I felt was propaganda. Like I don't make it up. Now, am I spinning it a little bit? I guess you could say that, but I didn't feel that way either. I would find things that I genuinely felt excited about. Like if somebody came to set and I had journalists on set, the reason they enjoyed coming more maybe than with others is because I didn't just like tell them some weird thing,
Spiel, yeah.
spiel. I was actually like excited about the thing I was telling them about. I would, I actually thought the things that I was telling them about, I genuinely felt excitement about them. Now, I worked like on, say, a horror film. I'm actually not the audience member for that. That's maybe not something I'm excited about, but I was excited about, okay, how do we make this doll, for example, or how, so that's what it is. So maybe by choosing to focus on that, is that propaganda? Maybe you could say that. I don't know. But, but somebody else might love that genre. But I loved the fact that we built this and I loved that
Yeah.
we had
Yeah.
this experience, so that's what I would focus on. And rather than, manipulating some element of it. But different people behave differently with this, right? This was my way of dealing with, because I don't think I could do that job. I couldn't promote something that I didn't like, that I thought was genuinely bad. And if I was promoting something, I would have to tell the truth about it in some way, So that could be a story. It has to be a story. That's true.
Yeah. And so when you get back into journalism from the entertainment business, do you just follow your nose? You just pitch ideas and you're kind of freelancing it?
Yeah. So I was freelancing. I mean, I am, I guess, still a correspondent for Variety. So that was probably my longest kind of engagement, I think, in like 12 years now.
Variety is an
And
industry mag, right? Is it
yeah,
not? Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
it is an industry magazine. I think they published the first movie review
Ever?
ever, ever.
Oh, that's a
Yeah,
thing.
that is pretty historic, one might say. Yeah. So that was a pretty big thing, and they approached me about 12 years ago. So that was
Oh,
pretty
wow.
cool.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
good. Okay.
and that was quite an interesting learning curve. Because it is a different type of writing, because I was writing like more features, and with them I had to learn also how to write news, and for people who were very expert in the area that I was writing about, but also people who might not be experts. So it's like, how do you
You're a
bridge the
translator,
two?
kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of it is like, okay, how do you understand something also technical, right? Like, how do you understand something technical in a way that you can explain it to someone who is not? And I think that's a really good skill. Very important to be able to do that as a writer.
Hmm.
So yeah, so I like them.
What were the
Some people
features that
don't.
you got to work on? Like, and what is a feature, just for sake of
A
understanding?
feature would be like a longer piece that's more in depth, whereas and often relying on interviews. I mean, for me, most of my writing was definitely more reliant on interviews, whereas news, well, could also rely on interviews, but it's a little less in depth, shorter usually.
And breaking stuff that's happening
Breaking, yeah,
right
exactly,
now.
more,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And then what's been newer for me is like writing from my own point of view, which I didn't like as a journalist. It's interesting, like, there's a lot of criticism about bias and having things like that, bias and having lacking objectivity, and I think those are the things that in my writing previously, those are things that I was not biased in my writing. Well, to the extent that one, at the very least, that was the effort that I've made.
Well, it depends on what you're talking about. It's hard to be biased about, like a disaster that happens to a Terry Gilliam film, right?
All right.
But it's easy to be biased about some legislation that might disenfranchise or, reorder society in some way. So,
Absolutely. Although people do point out a lot of even cultural writing that is biased. And in some ways, you can say that even some of the things that I wrote about, you could say that it is biased in maybe like the language that you use, or like I wrote about like LGBTQ cinema. The fact that I even wrote about it, could you say, well, that's displaying bias? Or, yeah, things like that could be considered as such. But I think it's also like how you write about it and why you're writing about it. So, I mean, some of the things that I wrote about, I did get assigned, so I didn't choose those pieces,
mhm.
like that one. But then how I approached that piece is like I always approached it more from because I'm interviewing sources, I'm really telling the story from their point of view.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like from my point of view. I don't think people can read these pieces and determine what my thoughts are on it. And I don't
That's a
think
good
it's
litmus
relevant to the
test.
story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then your point of view creeps in at some point. And is that because of where you ended up going as a writer, or where journalism has kind of crept, do you think?
Well, I think, two answers. I think my life circumstances caused me to go there. So I don't think it's because of journalism, because I'm not. So the reason that I've gone there is changes in my own life, but journalism also has gone there. I think if I'm writing pieces for publication in, like, say, mainstream outlets, and I'm not writing an op-ed, I would still not inject that into those articles, because that's something I strongly believe in. Unless I'm writing an op-ed, I've written a few op-eds for like Newsweek. That's the place for it. But journalism has, and that concerns me very much because it has, in my view, become something where, well, journalists, my colleagues, openly say this, right? They say this is a place for them to put forward their views and practice activism. It's not like a secret. This is something they're proud of, especially the younger generation. And in part because they don't have, old school kind of editors to work with who push back on that.
Or they openly kick those old school editors out, as we saw over the past 10 years or so at the New York Times.
That has also happened, yes. And just the values are so different and at odds with each other because they genuinely believe that is right. That is the moral thing to do. And so it's very hard to kind of bring those values back. Whereas I think, well, your duty is like, who says that you have the right view? And again, like, what if you flip it? It's just that right now, all these publications, I mean, the mainstream are very heavily liberal. From my understanding, say in the UK, it's much more conservative. Or at least that's what people tell me, that a lot of the publications are conservative, with the exception of something like The Guardian or The Independent.
The British have a totally different meaning to conservative and liberals.
It's not as extreme.
It's not as extreme.
Yeah, no.
But
they still view
they're
it
much more liberal
in
certain ways than us, and much more conservative in other ways too. So it's just a different formulation of those two things.
Yeah. But I
those
guess
two words, even, like, what does those even mean? But we know that the mainstream media is all walking in lockstep, and we see that it's all adopting more and more progressive tones and points of view and moral frameworks that they load onto that, including a lot of identity markers. Like they take pains to kowtow to certain communities or to arrange the facts in a certain way to move the needle from their point of view towards a better point of view that would be a progressive lens of what progress is for them. It's kind of like it's the same thing. So I understand. I think my audience understands what you mean by liberal. It's difficult to have a conservative point of view at this point because all of the journalists come from these institutions called universities that are uniformly progressive too. So it's really hard.
Well, also the people who seem to choose those careers do seem to generally be more likely to be liberal on the ideological spectrum. Yeah. Obviously not all, because we are seeing, I mean, all these, there's like conservatives.
There's a market for them.
Yeah.
No, for conservatives, especially through the internet, which goes back to what we started with. What do we do with the bias in journalism? Is it journalism anymore? Is it all media? Is it all just content? Is it all just entertainment? Is it all just pure postmodern narrative chaos? Is that what it is?
It is. Well, postmodern chaos sounds just about right. I think, I mean, to me, I'm very idealistic in many ways. I'm a realist too, but I also am an idealist in many ways. And what I'm seeing in the landscape, I just really dislike, And I guess what my point was initially, but when I said, the fact that these people who think it should have this ideological slant and that's the right way to go with it is that, well, what if you flip it, right? They're okay with it because they hold the power, but you flip the power switch and it's the other side, then how comfortable are they with that? Like, I think you should always pose that question. But I think in general, like, even though we cannot maybe achieve full objectivity, I think we should strive for it. And I think there's a lot of people who are kind of frustrated with it, where they do want someone, I think they want to be able to have a media source where they can trust them to, at the very least, try to get to some semblance of an objective truth. But we also have a huge amount of audience who, when they see a very highly subjective media source that aligns with their worldview, they look at it and they say, well, that's the truth. Thanks for telling the truth. So you kind of have kind of things at odds with each other. And while you have that and people have that cognitive dissonance, I don't know if you can create that system. I'd like to believe that you can. And if you offer it and you put it out there in the world, I like to think that if you build that, people will recognize it for what it is and come to it. And I do think that the way that you do that is by combining, creating a newsroom where you have people from different ideologies, but ones that aren't trying to necessarily, they have a common agenda, and that agenda is to try to be neutral in terms of holding powers accountable, trying to tell the truth, trying to get at the truth of something, not trying to drive their worldview forward, but by providing different perspectives because they can hold each other accountable. I think that would make it a more likely that they'll have some level of neutrality. Because if I'm going, oh, my liberal perspective is I'm getting a little biased here, my colleague could say, hey, Katherine, you're leaning a little here, here's where your blind spot is, right? And I think that would help create an environment for that. But you have to have people who have that common goal. And I think that's where, but instead we have sort of very segregated newsrooms, essentially, right? And so you have these either very liberal or incredibly conservative. And then your audiences too. And now they're feeding off of separate news sources too. So they're getting perspectives of, it's like they have two different worlds or, three different worlds that they're, three different perspectives of what the world looks like. And in the past, you had certain papers that everybody would read and they would have a certain sense of reality that we get from them. And maybe that's not great, right? That's maybe too limiting.
I don't know how you go back to gate-kept media any more than you go back to a Protestant nation state. I don't think.
I'm not saying that you need to be, I'm not saying that it needs to be gate-kept. But there is something about having so many that makes us much more divided. And it's the same with our media, like films and TV shows. There isn't a unity. So how do we
Disney
keep
has
having options? But
one very specific ideology that it wants to push, right? And it's in lockstep with many other of the big corporate medias through their, through the game that they have to play with the corporate governance, the ESG stuff. They all have to have certain representations of certain woke dogma. So they are unifying around certain, I don't think it's organic at all, and it leads to
you don't think it's organic?
No, they are required. I was just reading something today. More and more corporate, all the big corporate companies are, in order for them to get some sort of badge from the Human Rights Campaign, they have to have a certain number of representation, and every year it goes up more in order for them to get their corporate governance badge. Right?
But they did agree to it, so in a way, the ESG isn't organic, right? But it is something that they didn't have to opt into. So they opted into it because they thought in some way it would benefit them, or the people at the top ascribe to the, ideology of it. So either they believe in it and they're true believers, or they think from a corporate point of view that it benefits them to show that off in some way. So they think it's good business.
Yeah, but does it create good product? Does it create a good society? And I know we've strayed off of the journalism thing into just pure entertainment stuff, but you do see a unification around what people derisively call woke. You do see a corporate, just like you were talking about, with 3 newspapers, there's one ideology. Everybody for the month of June is going to have the same symbol and the same color palette for all of the products, right? That's just, you see this conglomeration, this unification around diversity, ironically enough, but a very narrow form of diversity, I would argue. But you do see that coming back.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand where the because you said it's not organic, and I can see that part of that, obviously, like you said, ESG, it's a
Well,
system,
it is.
but
Yeah, it isn't. It's emergent, but it's not like I get. Yeah, well, there's a convergence of people with similar, probably very self-interested goals that are converging on the same ideology because it just so happens to be running through the entire system, from the university to the government to all of the major corporations. They're all converging on the same thing. So it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel fresh. Like when you look at the products of it, when you look at like the Rings of Power, I couldn't watch it, but I watched all the, or the Marvel, like where the Marvel kind of thing went. You can see it converging towards a certain sort of ideology, but losing the magic, which would be the organic thing, losing that creative thing. I see that. Do you see that? Do you?
yeah, I do. But I think I guess where I see that, why I see that happening, I guess, is it's a combination of things. So I see a movement sort of starting like towards these kind of ideological ideas, and yeah, like some of it comes, definitely a lot of it comes from universities and some other subsets of culture. And then it just starts to kind of dominate because those voices are kind of more aggressive and more dominant. And then, but it's not necessarily like a great reflection of what everybody in the culture thinks. The problem is people are too afraid to go up against these people, especially when that movement becomes too strong. And then people start copying it because it becomes the trend. And once it becomes so big and dominant, it becomes even harder to step up to, push against. And then the conversations that I have with people, creative people in the industry, or even crew members, like a lot of them don't really subscribe to this stuff. They don't like it, but they're so afraid to say anything because of their careers and jobs, or they go along with it because they think, oh, well, maybe that's the right thing, because they're afraid of being wrong because this all sounds so good and noble.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like a few things going on there. And it's more like, to me, it seems more like the mob mentality, if anything. So I see it almost like an organic thing, but organic in the sense of like mob mentality, what happens to crowds, the madness of crowds.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of what happens, and maybe that happens with a lot of these cultural movements. How communism happens too, like how fascism happens. How did Germany? We're really straying far now, but like, how did Germany go from being this like democratic, freewheeling country when it did? Right, it was a very free country, and then in Europe, and then it went from that to killing of people for their race and for their homosexuals and people like that. How did that happen, right? And it happened because there were slow changes, and it was this little bit of a movement, and then little by little, people didn't say anything until big things started happening, and then it was the consequences of speaking up were just much more big, and now it's gotten more extreme. And so I think this is a very similar phenomenon in a way. Hopefully it doesn't lead to anything quite as horrific, but I think that's what we see throughout history.
Yeah.
Is so I don't think it's people in a room sitting and being like, okay, we're going to push this ideology here. I think it's really. I think people do get to. I've been in some meetings where people.
There are
We should
lobbyists.
promote. They do cheer themselves on, again, because they think it's good. They see people they see it as like marketing campaigns, like brands in particular. They're trying to come up with the next thing and to tie on. Like I've been in brainstorming sessions where we're like literally looking at calendars, like what day's coming up, like there's like a billion holidays that are completely made up, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're like, okay, today is asexual International Asexual Day. And if you were like a
Wait, are you serious?
creative
Is it?
marketing, yeah, it is.
That's why I've been feeling so low on the libido today. It's just I
It
feel like
makes sense, right? So
kind of
now
just
you
like
know. So don't
empty
feel bad. You're
college.
not alone. So, well, actually, you are.
Ouch.
But it's
Have you
like
seen have
you.
you seen the because you've been in this industry, you've been in media for, a couple decades now. What's your perspective on the change, the idealization or the ideologicalization of the media and of film? What was your interactions with it over time and your stance now?
Yeah. I did an interview for my podcast recently with Chris Gore, and I think he captured this really well. He's the publisher of Film Threat, which is covers independent film. But he said, it's not like we didn't have any ideology in film before, but it wasn't so over the head, right? It was like, here we're gonna put this here, and you're gonna draw your own conclusions because people knew how to write subtext, so it didn't drive you crazy.
Yeah.
And now people are, they don't know how to write subtext, so they're like, racism is bad. It's like, we know, right? So it's kind of annoying when people are like, yeah, racism is bad. And I think that's kind of part of it. It's like people being hit over the head with these ideas. And instead of, I think film TV was more about just asking questions and saying things, being not being afraid to be taking some dangerous stances and saying it's like comedy too. It's like scary to say things that might offend somebody. But like that's kind of the point sometimes. Sometimes you want to offend somebody because you want that reaction. That reaction is part of it. Like that's part of the conversation. Or you want the reaction because you're trying to figure out where you're gonna go with it, right? And film is like that too. And so it sterilizes the art and a lot of the people that I talk to, they say I wouldn't have created this really piece of work that changed lives. That person's life who created it, but also the lives of people who've experienced the piece of work. And they wouldn't create it now either because, it would be deemed too controversial or because the person happens to be a white male. And the person I have in mind, I won't out them, but the person I have in mind had a very difficult life, right? Like just not privileged, quote unquote, privileged in any way, really tough. And yet this person wouldn't have this greenlit, and it's changed what kinds of things people write now or the projects they pursue. That is a terrible thing. There's so many stories that might not be told purely because of the demographic of that individual.
Well, not told to, or I don't think not told, but not given the ad budget, perhaps. Not given
Well, maybe
the
not told.
funding.
They're not greenlit. I know a lot of projects that are
Well,
not
why
even
can't they
being,
just go somewhere else? I mean, this equipment
like
is.
where
I'm surrounded by equipment that
you.
50 years ago people would die for, right?
Well, movies are incredibly expensive to make. If you're going to make, I mean, yes, you could make a very independent film, but a lot of films, you still need the right kind of, yeah, I mean, there's some movies you can maybe make on a very small budget, but a lot of movies you can't for various reasons. It just doesn't fit the vision. The stuff that I write, like I wrote something. I mean, mine could get greenlit because it's not particularly controversial, but it's it's a period piece. You cannot make that on a shoestring budget. There's just no way.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
True. So there was a conversation we were having. Then we got sidelined by the convergence of storytelling, the convergence of narrative and ideology into bias and stuff. But what drives you to write? What are you looking for in the world? What do you want to tell as a journalist? What do you find your interests to be gravitating toward?
Well, lately, it's been harder, like, because as a freelancer, I would pitch stories that were interesting to me, and I would write those, and I found myself not freelancing as much, which is not so good financially, I guess. But part of it is because the things that have been more interesting to me are the kinds of stories that are very hard to publish, because I am interested in telling stories that are, well, the mainstream won't publish or will judge me very harshly for. Even like I as an experiment, I wanted to write a piece about the Trotter files, for example. And as an experiment, I pitched them to pretty much every tech publication, and I didn't get a single one to even respond to me. And I have so many mainstream big publication bylines. That's not a common phenomenon for me, right? To not even get a response. So that was very telling. And also, I've been really enjoying being able to write like just things from my perspective that are more, I guess, personal essays. I get very worried when some of my readers say, "Oh, I like reading Katherine's work as an example of journalism and news reporting or whatever," because I'm like, no, that's not what it is. It's all op-eds. Anything you read on my Substack is op-eds. I want to be very clear. It's opinion. Even if I'm commenting on something that's a little bit more in the news, it's still commentary. But I have been enjoying that because I've never written that way before. And it seems to be connecting with people.
So now you're kind of developing, there's an element of philosophizing. There's an element of maybe not systematizing your thought, but actually introspecting on the world and yourself, developing yourself as a thinker more than a storyteller. What do you see your stance or your position or your worldview, your bias being?
Interesting. What's my bias?
What's your bias?
Yeah, maybe I'm
resting biased face.
Yeah. I mean, I know I have a bias. Like I know what my political leanings are, even though I say I'm homeless. I only say that because politically I'm homeless, as in like I don't have a political allegiance or a party.
Yeah.
But I know that where I lean, I'm like definitely more of a liberal. So I guess that there's a bias there, like personal freedoms and things like that. That's a bias, I suppose. But as a writer, I really try to explore every issue from as much of a balance. Like I've gotten even a nickname. People like to call me the balancer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Or the voice of reason.
Okay.
Because I'll look at something and I'll try to find that like the reason in it, the balance in it.
Such as what? Personal freedoms. Is there a balance? Or is that just an inherent good?
Well, I think there is a balance, of course. Well, I think once you start talking about, okay, my view is I do believe ultimately, even if I may judge somebody's choices, if they don't infringe on anybody else's, I do believe in, live and let live. Once they start to infringe on somebody else's, that becomes a much bigger conversation, right? Because that's no longer just their
How do you
choice.
know the difference between infringing and not infringing? I mean, how can we know that the harms that somebody does to their self isn't trickling out, matriculating into the cultural soup?
Well, I guess you can make the argument like, okay, somebody commits suicide, right? they're only doing the harm to themselves, but they're emotionally harming someone else because they're upset they've died. I wouldn't make that argument because, anything you say is always going to also impact somebody else. And so that to me is a little bit too far. But if we're talking about
Marijuana,
physical spaces or
physical
things
spaces.
Yeah.
What's a physical space? Like a cubicle?
Physical.
Everybody gets their own cubicle?
Like a cubicle or, okay, well, when we're talking
A bathroom?
about things
A
like
changing room?
mandates, or bathrooms or changing rooms or prisons, things like that, I would say
That's
that
coming.
becomes
That's
a
coming at
discussion.
you pretty quick
I know.
from your area of the wood. Do you feel that there are times to become an activist, to push your bias, because you see that if you don't push your bias, then harms will be perpetuated through society?
I don't feel like it's pushing my bias. I would say I would like people to consider things from my point of view.
Okay.
And I do feel some responsibility to speak up about certain things. Like, for example, I did feel very strongly about mandates, for example. And I did feel a responsibility to speak up, or suppression of speech, things like that. I did feel a certain personal responsibility to speak up about those things because I knew that my point of view was also I was not alone in thinking that, but I knew that a lot of people were like very much afraid to say these things.
Did you get any callbacks from these major publications when you trotted out your view on mandates?
No, no. I did. I mean, most of it I've done through my own, Substack and Twitter.
Yeah.
I know that some of these things that I've talked about, some of the editors and other writers do support my views, just would never say it publicly.
What does that say? What does that say? What does that tell me about the mainstream media? What does that tell me about?
It says there's a lot of fear and perhaps a certain cowardice, but at the same time, I'm sort of hesitant to say that because, look, I felt that too. And I don't like to vilify people for that because I think that we all come to this stuff on our own and we don't know what.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a difference between vilifying
are.
people, but also the reputation, that if the fourth or fifth estate, I think it's the fifth, is rotten to the core, do I want to stand anywhere near that part of the building? And what does that tell me about the other pillars of the building? Like.
Yeah. But I also think there are people who are trying to do better. So, okay. And I've gotten really attacked for this recently. They're like, you're evil because you've been involved in the media, like pure evil.
Okay.
Like,
yeah.
And some people think that these institutions should just be destroyed. I don't think it's realistic. And B, I would like to try and change them. That's kind of my goal, I guess. So I try to reach out to people and I try to work with people who have similar goals and understandings. And I want to empower other people like me. And even through my own actions, I thought, honestly, when I started speaking out, and this started with the Newsweek piece that I published, I did think that that was going to kill my career. And I was worried about that. And
what
I thought,
was
okay.
specifically that piece about?
Oh, yeah. Well, it was about people who suppress other people's speech and attack them and are intolerant and are bullies because of what had happened to me. But also things that I've seen happen to other people. And that's really what caused me to speak out, because I've seen so many people speak their views. And we're not talking about people saying, I love Hitler either. We're saying, people saying pretty reasonable
anything,
things.
anything except supporting the regime is supporting Hitler at this point. basically.
Yeah, that's right. But people being just attacked for just about anything, and this intolerance to having any conversations through anybody's viewpoints you just don't support,
Yeah.
and it's like stiff, not being able to handle any kind of conversation. And I just felt like I couldn't live with myself if I didn't say anything. And I thought, and because I was getting so many messages from different people telling me about their horrible experiences and their fears and how ashamed they were also about not being able to speak out against what they were seeing, I felt that personal responsibility of of speaking out. But I was absolutely terrified at the time. It kind of brings us back to where we were talking about how shy I am.
Raising your
And
hand. Yeah.
yeah. And it's like the same thing. I mean, I just was absolutely in that horrible headspace. But I decided, if this happens, maybe I'll open a coffee shop or something. I just didn't know what was going to happen. But I think my goal was like, and with everything that I'm doing is like, I want people to see someone like me who is a pretty, I think I'm a pretty reasonable person. I don't think I'm insane, radical. I don't think I'm a particularly brave or like, strong armed kind of person. And the fact that I'm on the liberal side of things is also, I think, significant, important, and probably why I started admitting to that. I think as an example, I think it was an important thing to do because I want other people to see that and see that that's okay. Mm-hmm. And I think it did have some of that effect. Maybe I don't know at what scale, but I have seen other people start speak. At least they speak with me. That's a start. People reach out to me all the time. I've seen people show more acts of bravery in their life. And I'm hoping that it reaches a bigger scale over time. And people do send me messages sometimes of what they've done, the conversations they've now had with other people. I think that's really important, and I hope to encourage more people to do that. And that's kind of the goal. And I think with these institutions, I'm hoping to find more sort of, quote unquote allies. And I know they're out there. And, I don't know how many, but I know that they exist. And
for now.
Yeah, for now. But maybe we can get them, more. And that's why I have conversations with people. I don't attack people with pronouns in their bios for a reason. I tend to not use the words woke very much myself. I get what it means. No, I know, but no, because it's a shorthand. I just try not to use it. It's easy to. I just don't do it only because I'm just trying not to dismiss people right away because I try to have conversations.
Dismiss people, yeah.
No, I just try not because I want to have conversations with them, right? I want to reach them. Yeah. I want to get a sense of why they do what they do. And we also don't have the same understanding of language. Like the word woke, like a lot of people see it as an attack when you use woke because they're like, why do you criticize me for being woke? Because they see it as that original definition, right? And I know exactly which definition you're using. So it's like, we don't even have like a common language. And I've changed, I've shifted my positions on this stuff. I used to use the word woke more in the past.
Well, yeah, you're playing a very, you have to be calculating. There's nothing wrong with being calculating. It doesn't mean you're duplicitous or false, but you have a goal that you want to achieve, which includes other people with other points of view. So being able to adapt your language and your attitude and maybe even kind of like shift your point of view in order to see the perspective of other people. It's not a hypocrisy. It might be a little bit of acting, but it doesn't mean that it's untrue.
I don't think it's acting. I mean, I think because sometimes people have surprised me. Because I try not to assume things about people, because I've sometimes had people, you don't know why somebody has pronouns in their bio. Sometimes they're forced to. Sometimes they believe it for a particular reason, and you want to get at the root of that. And sometimes when it comes to woke, yeah, I just don't want to isolate people just offhand. Just like I don't want to dismiss someone who has MAGA in their profile, right? Like I don't do that either, despite whatever my personal feelings on it are. And so I try just in general, just give people a chance as individuals. So I don't think that's acting at all. I think it is a consistency of thought, which is to judge people as individuals and to give them a chance instead of giving it like, you know, making these generalizations about them too quickly.
Well, yeah, I was making a joke on the word hypocrisy, which actually does come with does derive from old French word for hypocrite or actor. But I could also argue, not to push the point, that what you told me about your time in acting was that it was becoming authentic, becoming more and more in the moment, more and more authentic and reactive to the matter at hand. So I was using acting in a good way, in that full richness that you described earlier.
I see. Yeah.
Have you seen any? I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I was going to make a bad joke, so it's fine.
Oh, don't do it. It's your turn. I did my bad joke.
It's a bad. I know. Well, that was basically what I was going to say.
Yeah. Have you seen? Because you expressed a desire to be a part of a newsroom or start a newsroom that has some sort of heterodox tensions within it, this creative competitive tension that produces less bias or more truth. Have you seen that? Because I've seen there's a lot of magazines and collectives that pop up that I could name. I would leave a lot off, but some of them are more left, some of them more right. You know, you got Quillette, which started out as kind of the bastion of heterodox thinking, but then situations happen where pressures increase and people become ideological under certain social inputs. So have you seen the promise of that off the beaten path, or even like a semi-reputable collection of
I've seen the promise of that, and some nothing to my satisfaction. Yeah, I think because they've all gone a little bit ideological. That's the problem. Or even the word heterodox. I mean, it's funny because people like to refer to me as a heterodox thinker, and I've kind of pushed back on that a little bit because I think.
Did you do a stream about
heterodox? What?
Did you do a video where you talked about being heterodox?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, that was you. Okay, I don't. Somehow that came across my. Okay, but you're like, I'm not heterodox.
I'm not heterodox. Well, the reason it's not like it's a bad word. It sounded good. At first, I was like embraced it, but then I really thought about it, and I'm like, that doesn't make sense, because I think heterodox, just the nature of it. It's like. Yeah, the idea of heterodoxy. Yeah, because you're contrarian. But I'm like, I don't want to be contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. I think that's what I said in the video, is like, because it's like, it's anti-search for truth, right? Yeah. And I think, because I remember that, I think what caused me to even record that video was, I remember how, people got mad at me because I took a different stand. I took a more mainstream stance on something. It was Ukraine versus Russia, and people, I think, expected me to take the heterodox thing and be pro Russia, I guess, and I wasn't. And well,
you have reason for that. Too. You probably have a different perspective.
I have reason, but I also looked very deeply into that particular topic, because in the beginning I was actually open minded, because I thought, well, maybe there's something I don't know about it, I'm missing, because everybody's like screaming at me about it, and maybe there's something they know that I don't. So I did a lot of research about the topic, and I still arrived at the same conclusion, but just way more informed. And again, because I wasn't looking to be contrarian, I was looking for the truth, and I made my own assessments of it. And so I think that's more important. I don't believe in taking a heterodox position for the sake of it. But if you're applying it more like look at the dominant opinion and challenge it just to see if it stands up to scrutiny, if you're going to apply the word heterodox in that way, then I think that's a healthy thing to do.
What do you when you're looking for somebody to date, how high on the on the qualities of a person that you want to hang out with is nuance? Is nuance like number 5, number 7 out of 10? I mean, there's an infinite number of qualities, but
I don't think I thought of that in that way, but that'd be pretty high nuance because it relates to someone's understanding of the world in an accurate way. Right? Nuance is required to understand it in the most accurate way. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of misunderstandings with the person.
And valor? Is valor something that you valorize?
No.
No. Martial virtue, Roman virtue.
Yeah, I don't know, probably not that much. I do adherence to principles and doing what you say. You're somebody's word. Very important.
Follow through. Yeah.
Follow through. Yeah. If you give your word, honesty, like if you say something, that's a very important one. I've let people slip with that one too much.
As a publicist, I'm sure that you had to interact with that quite a bit.
Oh yeah, that too. I mean, yeah. But also, yeah, but even just in life, I think I hold myself to like way too, like I hold myself to a higher standard than I think I hold other people. And sometimes I feel like I need to hold other people to a higher standard than I currently do.
Well, it's better to err on the side of holding yourself to a higher standard than holding other people's to a higher standard. But
true, less disappointment.
Let it slide. Is there a work of fiction or even a movie or play that you return to over the course of your life that you've drawn inspiration, sustenance, enjoyment, pleasure from continually over an extended period of time?
I'll tell you which movie for some reason, I'm obsessed with. All That Jazz is one of my all-time favorite movies. I know, it's like a surprise, right? It's a Bob Fosse movie, and it's a musical. Came out in 1984, and it arrived on my doorstep one day. I don't know why. It's like I related to it so much, and yet it's about a womanizing, addicted to pills and booze and who knows of what else, and sex, man, choreographer. And yet, for some reason, I just relate to it, even though I'm none of those things. Maybe
you're not a philanderer?
Perfectionism.
Perfectionism.
Not yet. Working on it.
You have time. There are pills for this.
Time. Yeah, well, I'm working on it.
But just not on Asexual Day, okay?
I was gonna say my asexuality gets in the way. Yeah, I think like he's just there's something about. Is it what?
The actor? Is it Greg or something?
No. Rob Schneider. No, oh my God, totally not. Rob. It's Rob
Schneider. No.
Schneider, yeah.
No, it's not Rob Schneider.
No. I'm getting his name mixed up with a very different actor.
Scheider, Roy Scheider and Jessica Lange and Anna Reinking.
Anne Reinking, yeah. So it's just his choreography, the perfection of everything, the sensitivity of everything, and just it's showtime. There's something about that movie that just has a hold on me. I think the art, the perfectionism, the creation, I don't know. I just know I drove people crazy in my film directing class when I was in university, where I made people sit through a 10-minute musical number to dissect, and then made them dissect it. And I don't think they appreciated it the way I did at all.
What's coming up for you? What do you have planned? What's on the horizon for people to look forward to?
Well, there's some things I can't talk about, but there's
Ooh.
also, yeah, but there's also, I mean, I have my podcast called Forbidden Conversations. So I've been trying to keep up with that. Not quite as diligently as you keep up with your podcast, but you're inspiring me, maybe.
There we go.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you
Yeah.
some advice when we stop filming too.
Yeah, I look forward to that. There.
A little Bensplaining never hurt no one.
Honesty, yeah. Um, and I have some interesting guests coming up, and the idea is just having conversations with people that are maybe a little bit more controversial, contentious, though not all of them, but having it kind of in a more civil, nuanced way. And then I also have just some of my writing more on Substack. And
What's your Substack for the people who?
oh yeah,
Voice
who don't know?
Yeah.
It's randomminds.substack.com, or Katherine Brodsky.substack.com will also take you there.
Why random minds?
Because when random minds come together, they make something bigger and more extraordinary than
Right. Spontaneous order.
one mind. Okay. Yeah. And then I have my Twitter, Mysterious Cat, KAT. And despite the name, I'm not a cat lover. I'm a dog lover.
Oh, really? What kind of dog do you have currently?
But yeah.
Sorry.
But that's okay. I had the most amazing one-of-a-kind dog rescue animal. But now I have my sister's dog. I'm an aunt to a dog. Is that a weird thing to say?
It's kind of wine mommy, but
Yeah, I know. I've always had a weird thing about it, but I don't know. I don't want to say like owner, because it invokes like slavery. But this is only for
Lead
the people
bitch.
Listening.
You just be the lead bitch. That's a good one.
Oh God.
You don't like the sound of that.
No? I don't like that.
I'm the head bitch of a pack of
Can I
huskies.
give like a top secret to the listeners of just this podcast? This is supposed to be a secret, so only people listening to this will know this, but because I'm only going to announce this like way later. But so this is related to my sister's dog. I'm going to be her campaign manager because I'm going to run a presidential campaign for the dog, Lily. She's going to run against, probably Trump and Biden. Yeah.
Wait, in like a dog show?
No, presidential campaign.
Of the United States?
Yeah. Because she was born in LA, so technically she's eligible.
Okay. I was thinking she's from another country, so maybe it'll work out. I mean, you guys have some tough competition with the giant asteroid people every year.
Well, later she's going to run for Canada too, because she's now a citizen of Canada as well. But but she actually, I think she has a sob story. I mean, she's from the mean streets of LA, from Skid Row.
Okay. Oh wow,
yeah,
okay.
So she was, So
addicted to fentanyl?
She has a chance, and she's cuter. Yeah, I'm pretty sure she is, based on her. Like, she goes around like looking for, and she constantly is on drugs. Like, she twice now had to go to the vet because she like consumed joints. So
okay, well, probably healthier than the current president.
Probably. So I think, and honestly, she's way cuter than any of the candidates running. I think we can vouch for that. So, and more snuggly, and she's going to have a really good platform.
What's the platform?
I mean, we're
Is
going to come
there
up with it, but I'm actually going to make it like very official. Like there's going to be a whole like platform announced. There's going to be probably a
the
website.
paperwork? Oh,
There might be a
website.
run.
Okay.
There's going to be a running mate,
Okay.
and
Okay, he's going to go on
like
a tour of Ohio and New Hampshire for the primary season.
you never know.
Well, you start fundraising now because you're going to have quite a substantial war chest to
I think
keep
we're
up with.
going to get a lot of publicity. You know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know how to. You would know. You got the connections, so you're already set for really making a splash.
What was that? Was that a special signal for my Jewish nose? And
We were not going to mention. I spent the last 2 hours not talking at all about your Jewishness, but we did get into Ukraine. But now you had to spring that on me in the last.
well, I didn't. It's not my fault you made an anti-Semitic remark.
I just had an itch. I didn't know you're so sensitive about the Semitism.
No, I mean it's it's fine. It just doesn't make me wealthy. Like you should really, I hate when people peddle in stereotypes like this.
Really?
Yeah, or were you insinuating that I control the media? I really can't tell.
Are
Or was it
you
both?
well? You are into entertainment, and you assume that you don't have a bias, which is pretty. That's a pretty supremacist attitude that you're above bias. So I mean,
I
there's
didn't say I was about bias. I said I had a bias.
okay.
Wait,
Which
did I
is
say I
the
didn't?
truth, right? Which is like some sort of like transcendent,
Wait, the truth
God-given
with
the truth.
quotes?
Yeah, no, I
Well,
mean, what is this
what?
truth
It
thing?
is the chosen people. So if anyone's going to have the truth, then
It would be, yeah, the truthy ones.
the truthy ones.